All right, hello, and welcome back to the Broken Business Models podcast. We're your hosts, Ryan and James. And before we get into today's podcast, just a quick disclaimer, nothing in this podcast or any of our other materials should be taken as investment advice. James or I could have positions in any of the stocks we may mention, and we reserve the right to change those positions potentially at any time, with or without notice. So make sure to always do your own research and consult with a professional before making any investment decision. With that being said, the topic of today's video is going to be PureCycle Technologies, which just released its Q3 earnings results this morning. So we talked about PureCycle Technologies before on this channel, but just as a very quick background for those who may not be as caught up on the story, PureCycle Technologies is a startup that went public right at the peak of the SPAC mania of 2020 and 2021. And their business model is they have this technology that they want to operationalize that basically allows you to use low quality plastic waste to create high quality recycled plastic material. Now, the problem with this technology is that it's a very difficult engineering and scientific technology to operationalize. It was actually developed by a different company, but given up to PureCycle for a very marginal price. And it uses extreme processing techniques and it's just a very difficult process to operationalize. PureCycle has dealt with has been dealing with these operational difficulties in a way that has led to a desperate financial situation since it has been public, leading to continual quarterly net losses, negative free cash flow, and to this date they have reported no appreciable revenue. So about the operational difficulties, they originally promised investors that production was supposed to begin what would be 2 years ago today. They've had continual delays based on these operational difficulties, which they've given various excuses for, everything from experiencing delays and unexpected delays in the delivery of certain equipment that they need to build up their production facility, other kind of force majeure delays outside their direct control, and more recently, even more vague excuses like difficulties removing contaminants from their materials. And as I mentioned earlier, these operational difficulties have resulted in no material revenue to date. So where does that put the company as an investment today? So financially, in the first half of 2024, they generated negative $100 million of free cash flow, leaving them with $10 million of cash and equivalents as of the second quarter earnings release. So obviously a very desperate financial liquidity position forced them to raise $90 million from a long-term investor called Celebra Capital, just to give them 1 or 2 more quarters of runway. Now, leading up to the Q3 earnings release, there's been a lot of hype among investors and hopes about what they would report as an update in the Q3 earnings release. So now, as of this morning, we have that earnings release, and we can look at it and see whether or not the recent run up in the stock price in anticipation of this earnings release is justified. So with that, I'll kick it over to you, James, to go over what is going on with this update.
Yes, thank you. And before we move on with the topic of today's video, just a quick reminder to anybody who doesn't already know that we have a website called differentiatedanalytics.com, where we provide a whole host of resources for investors. Most notably, we produce original short selling research where we identify companies that we believe to be either fraudulent or overvalued, and then we write detailed research reports about them, basically explaining our bear thesis. So if that at all sounds interesting to you, make sure to check out differentiatedanalytics.com. The link is in the description below. With that out of the way, let's get back to PureCycle. So as Ryan mentioned earlier, just this morning, November 7th, 2024, PureCycle released their third quarter update. And so first, let's look at what they said about the production numbers for their facility in Ironton, Ohio. So they said As previously announced, the Ironton facility hit 3 key production milestones before the end of the third quarter, including 1 million pounds of feedstock processed in a week, 200,000 pounds of feedstock processed in a day, and feed rates of more than 10,000 pounds per hour. But then, if we look at the total amount of recycled plastic that they produced in the third quarter, they only produced 3.5 million pounds of recycled pellets in the entirety of the third quarter. Now, there are 13 weeks in a quarter. So if they were actually producing at the max rate of 1 million pounds per week, then that would have got them to 12 or 13 million pounds for the quarter, but they only were able to produce 3.5 million pounds in the quarter. So there's a couple of reasons for the discrepancy. So the fact that they were able in a 1 week period to process 1 million pounds of feedstock, that does not mean that they are able to sustainably produce at that level week after week, because maybe they produce they process 1 million pounds of feedstock in that week, but then there's some mechanical issues and some things that need to be repaired, et cetera, et cetera. So then the next week's production might be lower. Also, there's a difference between how much feedstock they process versus how much output they produce, because some of the feedstock is contaminants and other stuff that has to be removed, and there's also some inefficiency in the process. So the amount of recycled product that you create as output is going to be lower than the feedstock you put in. So those are two very important things you need to keep in mind when PureCycle is talking about their ability to process feedstock. Now, the supposed nameplate capacity of their Ironton facility is to produce 107 million pounds of recycled plastic per year. And if you divide 107 million divided by 4, that is about 27 million pounds per quarter. So their nameplate capacity, their supposed nameplate capacity for the Ironton facility is 27 million pounds per quarter. Well, in the third quarter, they only produced 3.5 million pounds, which is only 13% of their nameplate capacity. So while they claim that they're doing better and increasing production, yeah, they're still tiny. Their current production is still tiny compared to the nameplate capacity. And another thing that we need to talk about is how they process their feedstock. So the original idea was that they would just buy feedstock. They would buy recycle, waste plastic as feedstock, and then just take that feedstock and then take it to their Ironton facility, put it through their recycling process, and then get recycled plastic out as output. As it turns out, the quality of the feedstock is way worse than expected. So now they just built a new facility in Denver, Pennsylvania, which they are using to sort the feedstock. So they get the feedstock, the waste plastic. They first have to send it to the facility in Denver, Pennsylvania. They have to sort out the contaminants and crap from it to get the high quality plastic. Then they send that high quality plastic to Ironton, where they have their facility where they do the actual recycling. So they're adding a new facility and a new step to the process, which is obviously going to add additional costs to the process, right? Because now there's two steps instead of one. Now, when PureCycle went public via a SPAC back in 2020 or 2021, the original plan was that they would just have the Ironton facility, and that alone would be enough to produce the recycled plastic. Now they are saying they now need an additional facility to sort the feedstock. So what caused this variance? Why do they now need this sorting facility when the original plan was that they would not need this? Well, this is in the Q3 conference call, the CEO explained that our original premise was that 95 to 98% polypropylene for the feedstock. That just doesn't exist. We found out that the amounts of coproduct 2, that's the contaminant, is much, much higher. So the CEO is explaining that when they were originally making the plans for Ironton, they assumed that they would be able to buy feedstock, the plastic waste, that would be 95 to 98% polypropylene. It turns out the actual percentage of polypropylene in the feedstock is way lower. It's as low as 75%, with the remaining being contaminants. So that's because of the higher than expected level of contaminants in the feedstock. That's why they need this sorting facility. So to understand how ridiculous this whole thing is, PureCycle was founded almost 10 years ago. They've raised hundreds of millions of dollars from investors. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars building their facility in Ironton, Ohio. All of that was done on the premise that they assumed that they would be able to get feedstock at 95% purity. Now, just now, they're finding out that the feedstock on the market is only 75%. So over the past 10 years, nobody at the company thought, maybe we should go out into the market, buy some feedstock and test it to see whether our 95% assumption is actually correct. And as it turns out, it's not correct. It's only 75%. So the company basically for 10 years, and they spent hundreds of millions of dollars building this facility, having done zero due diligence as to what type of feedstock they would actually be able to procure. This is a damning level of incompetence from the senior leadership of PureCycle. How can you be so incompetent that you're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, build an entire recycling facility, and not even do any due diligence as to what type of feedstock you'd be able to procure? And so now all of their initial projections from their SPAC presentation back in 2020, where they talk about the unit economics, et cetera, you can say that that's all BS because that's all based on false premises because the company did zero due diligence. So now they claim, so the company has claimed that they produced 3.5 million pounds of recycled polypropylene, and the polypropylene is the name of the plastic, right? So they've claimed that they produced 3.5 million pounds of this plastic, recycled plastic, in the third quarter, but they have not sold any of it yet. So even in the third quarter, they did not generate any revenue. But they claim that they're building up this inventory, and they say that they have 2.5 million pounds of available inventory, which they have compounded. And if you watched our previous video, which is linked in the description below, we explained that PureCycle, while their original plan was to sell their recycled polypropylene just on its own, it turns out that the quality of the polypropylene was much worse than expected. And in fact, it's so bad that they, instead of being able to sell it on its own, they have to compound it, which is basically mixing it with virgin polypropylene. So you'll get a mixture of half virgin, half recycled polypropylene, and they're selling this compounded product into the market because it appears that they're having trouble selling the recycled product on its own due to the low quality. Now, they claim that they have done this compounding and they have 2.5 million pounds of available compounded inventory that they're able to sell. Yet to date, they have not, as of the end of the third quarter, they have not sold any of it yet. If you have all this 2.5 million pounds, why haven't you sold it yet? So that maybe indicates that it's a little bit challenging for them to actually get customers to pay money for them. Maybe due to issues and concerns that customers might have about the quality of the product, because we know that's been an issue, and that's why they've even had to do the compounding in the first place, which they originally planned to sell the pure polypropylene, which that's not really workable due to the low quality. And then they have this slide in their presentation where they talk about, they have very favorable quotes from their partners. So here's, this company here is a company called Beverly Knits. It's they make fabric, and they use, I guess, plastic and other artificial materials to make their fabric. And they have been using PureCycle's product to make some fabric. Then there's this other company called Churchill Containers. They have used PureCycle's. They did some tests where they used PureCycle's plastic to make just some like disposable cups, or some what they call souvenir cups, like plastic cups. And then Mini Fibers is another carpet company, or a fabric company, and they were using PureCycle's plastic to make some fabric. And there's this company called Ray, which I was not able to identify what Ray is. I tried to Google. I could not find this company. But for the first three, I was able to find their pages on LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, it tells you, for any company, it tells you how many employees they have. And Beverly Knits has between 200 and 500 employees. Churchill Container has between 50 and 200 employees. Mini Fibers is tiny. They only have 11 to 50 employees. And then Ray, this Ray company, I wasn't even able to find at all. So these are tiny companies. And now if you remember back when PureCycle went public via SPAC, they were bragging about, we have partnerships or like agreements with L'Oreal and Procter and Gamble and all these giant multi-billion-dollar corporations. But now the rubber's hitting the road, and they claim that they're testing. They have these partners who are testing the product and saying favorable things about it. But these partners are these tiny companies. And then we also have to look at what type of stuff their partners are supposedly making with this plastic. And so here was, I believe this was from Beverly Knits. They used the PureCycle plastic to make this carpet. And you have to think, how much is the materials of a carpet actually worth? Because back in their SPAC presentation, they were bragging about the fact that their product, their recycled plastic, was so pure and so good that it could be used for food grade end products and have a clear color. Make a clear water bottle, for example, with their recycled plastic. And obviously for a clear water bottle, it has to be food safe and it has to have a very high level of purity that it's clear. But now they're saying that they're, working with Beverly Knits to make this carpet. Well, a carpet is not food safe. A carpet is not clear. So that again is another data point pointing to the fact that the quality of the recycled product, of PureCycle's recycled product, is worse than expected. So instead of making water bottles, they're making these rugs. And, the economics of that is almost certainly going to be much less favorable in terms of how much revenue they're going to be able to sell, how much in terms of the price per pound that PureCycle will actually be able to sell their product for if it's, of a lower quality, and you can basically only use it to make rugs. And then, as of today, PureCycle has generated zero revenue, but they always are claiming that, just give us a few more quarters and then eventually we'll start generating massive revenue. And they claim that they're going to be approaching a few different verticals, a few different end markets that they're targeting. So they're doing the fiber end market. That is, what we looked at earlier with Beverly Knits and Mini Fiber, where they're making these rugs. Now they claim that two producers have approved so they say two producers have tested the PureCycle's plastic and approved it for production, and they intend to start generating revenue in the fourth quarter of 2024. Now, those two producers are probably Beverly Knits and Mini Fibers, which is what they had from their previous slide. And these are tiny companies. So, okay, that's great. You're going to sell a little bit of plastic to these companies to make some rugs. These are tiny companies. It's not going to be a lot of revenue. Now, they also have other categories that they say they're pursuing. They say they're going to do injection molding packaging, and they are currently trying to work with Procter and Gamble to achieve that, to try to sell their plastic to Procter and Gamble, which will use it for packaging. And they're also working on film packaging and automotive parts. But these two, they haven't even disclosed what companies they're working with. But for the injection molding, they have said that they are working with Procter and Gamble to do this. But this thing with Procter and Gamble, Procter and Gamble is obviously a massive company. So if they were able to get Procter and Gamble as a customer, that would indeed be huge. However, it's important to note that Procter and Gamble has not yet committed to buying anything from PureCycle, and this is still in the very early stages. So let's look at what the company said. Specifically, they say the increased production volume at the Ironton facility and expanded efforts with compounding allowed the company to introduce samples to new markets and further trials with potential customers. PureCycle recently provided the Procter & Gamble company with compounded material. This will allow Procter & Gamble to begin the approval process for the recycled resin in various applications. PureCycle plans to provide material to Procter & Gamble for production beginning in Q2 or Q3 of 2025. So all that's happened with Procter & Gamble is PureCycle has sent a sample of their product to Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble will do some testing on it, and then later on, they will eventually decide whether or not they want to purchase any of it. But Procter & Gamble hasn't even made a decision or hasn't even made an order yet. Procter & Gamble is just saying, we'll look into it. And I think with a lot of these, pre-revenue SPAC type companies like PureCycle, the oldest trick in the book that they use is they will, not just PureCycle, if you go look at any of these like pre-revenue SPAC companies from the past few years, almost all of them, the oldest trick in the book that they use is they will go to some big mega corporation like a Procter & Gamble. They will get them to agree to like look into maybe using their product at some point in the future. Then the SPAC company like PureCycle can release a press release or put in their presentation, oh, we're working with Procter & Gamble. Yeah, you are working with Procter & Gamble in that you sent them a sample, and they will maybe consider they will maybe consider buying some product from you in the future. But at this point, no decision has made. They're only reviewing the sample. Nothing has happened yet. The only customers that have actually approved that they're actually going to use PureCycle's product are these tiny textile rug makers. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, if you listen to the conference call for the third quarter update, the CEO of PureCycle declined to give production guidance for the fourth quarter. And he said that production will depend on customer orders. The focus right now is on ramping up commercial sales. So remember, they are currently only operating in Q3. They were only operated at 13% of their supposed capacity, and now they're saying, the fourth quarter capacity will depend on how many orders they get from customers. And specifically, the CEO said, commercial ramp up is still a number that's in flux. Difficult to have a firm number there. So they don't even know how many orders they're going to get in the fourth quarter. Yeah, because they've given some samples to various prospective customers, but those customers have to look at the quality of the product and see whether or not they actually want to move forward. So it's all speculative at this point. We don't know how many customers are actually going to be interested in PureCycle's product because we don't know how consistent or good the quality of the product is, and we know that there have been issues of quality in the past. For these type of SPAC companies, it's very important to assess the credibility of the management by looking back at the promises and projections that they made in the SPAC presentation and comparing that to what's actually happening now. So back in the 2020 SPAC presentation, they claimed that they had tens of millions of pounds worth of offtake agreements with large blue chip customers, and that significantly de-risks their forward revenues. They said, we already have these agreements with these big customers that are going to buy huge amounts of plastic from us. Once we ramp up the production, we already got we already got that lined up, so we will have customers to sell to. Well, now, 4 years later, it's the exact opposite. They're saying, we don't even know how much we're going to produce in Q4 because we don't know how many customers we're going to have. Well, then what happened to these massive offtake agreements that you supposedly had, right? So it all just disappeared. It magically disappeared. When they were raising money for the SPAC, they had tens of millions of pounds of offtake agreements just lined up. Well, now that 4 years later, when the rubber has hit the road, nowhere to be seen, these supposed offtake agreements. And again, to my point, a couple of slides ago when I was talking about, they're working with Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble is looking into their sample. This is here we have a different example of PureCycle, working with a large corporation and releasing a press release, but it actually ends up amounting to nothing. So back in October of 2022, so this was 2 years ago, PureCycle agreed to create a joint venture with SK Geocentric. Now, SK Geocentric is part of the SK conglomerate, which is a massive conglomerate in South Korea. It's an absolutely huge company. It's tens of billions of dollars of revenue. It's a giant conglomerate in South Korea. So PureCycle claimed that they were starting this joint venture where they were going to build a plastic recycling facility in Ulsan, South Korea, with annual capacity of up to 60,000 tons. Now, 60,000 tons is 120 million pounds of recycled plastic per year, which is even bigger than the supposed nameplate capacity of the Ironton facility. So they're going to supposedly work with SK, this giant Korean company, to build a giant plastic recycling facility in Korea that would be even bigger than their Ironton facility in Ohio. And this, this sounds great. PureCycle is working with this giant South Korean company. Sounds like a huge, great deal. Well, on October 25th, 2024, PureCycle Technologies and SK Geocentric agreed to discontinue the joint venture between the company and SK. That was intended to construct and operate a facility. Coordinating multiple independent technologies on a single site proved to be too challenging for the overall project execution. The two sides are open to working together to find an alternative location in South Korea. So back October of 2022, they released this press release. Oh, we're going to build this giant facility in South Korea. We have a partnership with this giant South Korean company. Over the next 2 years, they say nothing about it. And then 2 years later, 2024, it's been canceled. And what's the reason they gave for the cancellation? Coordinating multiple independent technologies on a single site proved to be too challenging for the overall project execution. What does that even mean? According to PureCycle, if you believe PureCycle and listen to their commentary, they claim that they're finally ramping up production in Ironton, Ohio. They finally figured the technology out. They finally figured out how to do it. But if Ironton is really going so well and is really on the verge of ramping up as they claim, wouldn't SK see that and be like, oh, if Ironton's working so well, we should try to recreate that in South Korea as well, right? Because that's what you would think. But the fact that SK is terminating this joint venture, that kind of leads me to believe that maybe this technology is more difficult than PureCycle would lead you to believe. And just looking at the language of the press release, it's that PureCycle's press releases, it's always so weird. So they say that they've canceled this project in South Korea because the technology is too challenging. Okay. And then they say the two sides are open to working together to find an alternative location in South Korea. What does that mean? That makes zero sense. So for some reason, it's impossible to recycle plastic in Ulsan, South Korea, but you're going to find a different city in South Korea and make it the facility there instead. This just makes absolutely no sense. So it's nonsensical. And that's the whole point I'm trying to make is when you have these, what I call pre-revenue shitcos like PureCycle, announcing big partnerships with big corporations, be it SK, be it Procter & Gamble, be it whatever, it's often just ends up being BS and nothing actually happens. Now, we've been through a lot. The situation with PureCycle, we've been following them for a long time. I think this is like the third or fourth video we've made on PureCycle. It's a very complicated story with a lot of moving parts. So it can kind of get, if you get too bogged down in the weeds, you can sort of miss the forest through the trees. So here I just have, on one slide, I can kind of give a bigger picture overview of the entire PureCycle story. So going back to the 2020 SPAC presentation, what PureCycle was projecting and claiming, right? So they said their original projection was that they would start generating revenue at the Ironton facility in the second half of 2022. They claimed to have two offtake agreements already secured that secured the first 2 years worth of revenue. They claimed that Ironton would be such a huge success that they would then be able to secure financing to build a bunch more plants all over the world. And they claimed that by the second quarter of 2024, they would have 7 plants all over the world operational with annual capacity of more than 1 billion pounds of recycled plastic, right? So by now, according to their SPAC presentation, they should have had 7 plants operational all over the world. They claim that in 2024, they would generate $820 million of revenue and $450 million of EBITDA. And they claimed that their product will be so high quality, their recycled product will be so high quality that it will be the same quality as virgin plastic. So these were all their claims. So now, 4 years later, Q3 2024, what has actually happened? To date, they have generated 0 revenue. They have 1 plant in Ironton, Ohio, which they claim is operating at 13% capacity, but to date, they have not been able to sell any of that and have generated 0 revenue. The feedstock quality is way worse than expected, so now they have to have this sorting facility in Pennsylvania. The product quality is so bad that they have to compound it with virgin plastic, and they still haven't even sold any of that. And finally, they say that while they originally claimed that they had all these massive offtake agreements that secured their customer base, Now they're saying that the commercial ramp up is in flux because they don't know how many orders they got. They don't know how many customer orders they are going to get. And then the massive supposed offtake agreements magically have disappeared, right? So everything they promised has failed completely. The company is demonstrated an extreme level of incompetence and an extreme failure to meet any of their targets. Now, there's an old saying in Texas that if you fool me, you can't get fooled again. And PureCycle has been failing miserably ever since they went public. And yeah, now they're claiming, they're always going to claim, oh, we're on the verge of a big breakthrough, give us a few more quarters, and then we'll eventually solve all of our problems and ramp up production and generate huge revenue. But, given how much they failed in the past, why should you trust anything that this company tells you going forward? All right, so I think that wraps it up for everything we had to talk about PureCycle. If you have any opinions or thoughts about PureCycle, please let us know in the comment section below, and we will see you all on next week's video.